My husband looked me in the eyes and begged me to save his mother's life. He held my hands, tears streaming down his face, and called it the ultimate test of our loyalty. He said if I did this one thing, we would be bonded forever. I believed him. I went into surgery and gave her my kidney. 3 days later, he walked into my recovery room holding hands with another woman. He did not bring flowers. He brought divorce papers. He told me I had served my purpose. He thought he had taken everything from me. He thought I was just a discardable body part. But he forgot one thing. I was not just a wife. I was the one who controlled every single cent in his bank account. Before I tell you how I made them regret every breath they took, tell me in the comments if you have ever been betrayed by the person you trusted most. Like and subscribe to see karma served cold. The first thing I felt was the thirst. It was a dry, scratching sensation like someone had poured hot sand down my throat. I tried to swallow, but my tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of my mouth. Then came the pain. It was not a dull ache. It was a sharp, searing fire radiating from my right side, wrapping around my ribs and digging deep into my hip. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to breathe through the agony, but every inhale felt like a knife twisting inside me. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. I was alive. I had done it. I forced my eyes open, the bright fluorescent lights stinging my vision. I reached my hand out toward the bedside table, fumbling for the nurse call button, but my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see Dion. He had promised. He had sworn to me the night before the surgery that he would be right here in this chair the moment I woke up. He said he would not leave my side. He called me his hero. But the chair next to my bed was empty. There were no balloons. No get-well-soon cards. No warm hand holding mine. Just the cold, low hum of the air conditioning unit and the smell of antiseptic. The door handle clicked. Relief washed over me for a split second. Finally. I tried to shift my body to face the door, wincing as the stitches pulled tight against my skin. Dayon walked in. He looked impeccable. He was wearing his favorite charcoal gray tailored suit, the one I had bought him for his birthday last month. He was freshly shaved, and the scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne drifted into the room, overpowering the smell of the hospital. But he was not smiling. He was not rushing to my side to kiss my forehead or ask how I was feeling. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and he was not alone. Behind him walked a woman I had never seen before. She was young, maybe 25, with flawless skin and long, sleek hair. She was wearing a tight red dress that looked like a scream in this sterile white room. It was the kind of dress you wear to a cocktail party, not an intensive care unit. She stood close to Dion, too close, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Her nails were painted a sharp, glossy crimson that matched her dress. Water. I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed him to help me. I needed my husband. Dayon did not move toward the water pitcher. He did not even look at my dry, cracked lips. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. He tossed it onto the bed. It landed right over my legs with a heavy thud that sent a shockwave of pain through my fresh incision. "Sign this," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. It was like he was ordering a coffee, not speaking to his wife who had just undergone major organ transplant surgery. I looked down at the envelope. The bold black letters on the document peeking out seemed to blur before my eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I blinked, thinking it was a hallucination from the anesthesia. The painkillers must be making me see things. "Dion, what is this?" I asked, forcing the words out through the dryness in my throat. "We are done, Jasmine," he said, smoothing his tie. "You did what you needed to do. Mom is going to be fine. The surgery was a success. We do not need to pretend anymore." Pretend. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Before I could process the cruelty of his words, the door widened again. A nurse pushed a wheelchair into the room. Sitting in it was my mother-in-law, Lucille. The woman whose life I had just saved. The woman who had cried on my shoulder a week ago, begging for a second chance to see her grandchildren grow up. She looked flushed, healthy, vibrant. The gray, deathly pallor she had worn for months was gone. My kidney was working inside her body. It was cleaning her blood, giving her life right at this very second. I expected gratitude. I expected a thank you. I expected her to smack her son for treating me this way. Instead, she looked at me with a sneer, her eyes scanning my disheveled hair and pale face with utter disgust. "Hurry up, Dion," she snapped, adjusting the blanket on her lap. "I am tired of the smell. It smells like sickness in here." "Mom," I whispered, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Lucille waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Don't call me that. You are not family anymore. Dayon needs a real wife, Jasmine. A woman who can give him a son immediately, not someone who is going to be whining about recovery and scars for the next 6 months. You are damaged goods now, half a person. We need to focus on the future, and frankly, you are not in it." The woman in the red dress, Raven, stepped forward. She looked down at me with a pitying smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "You should just sign it, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Dion wants to start fresh. We have a wedding to plan, and we really don't want your negative energy dragging us down. Besides, you did a good deed. Isn't that enough reward for you?" I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. The heart monitor started beeping faster, the erratic rhythm echoing the panic rising in my throat. Dion checked his watch, looking annoyed. "Just sign the papers, Jasmine. My lawyer will pick them up in the morning. Do not make this difficult." He turned around and walked out without a backward glance. Raven followed, her heels clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. Lucille didn't even look back as the nurse wheeled her away, chatting excitedly about dinner plans. The room fell silent again. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the freezing air. I looked down at the white bandage on my side. A small red stain was beginning to bloom in the center of the gauze. My blood, my kidney, gone. And in exchange, I had a stack of papers ending my life as I knew it. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The shock had frozen my tears. I just stared at the spot where Dion's signature was already dry, bold, and arrogant. He thought he had won. He thought he had extracted everything of value from me. But as I lay there bleeding and abandoned, a cold clarity began to replace the pain. They took my kidney, but they forgot to check the paperwork. They forgot who actually paid for the surgery. And they definitely forgot that while I might be down a kidney, I still had the brain that built their entire fortune. The taxi ride from the hospital to the house I had bought with my own bonuses took 40 minutes. Every bump in the road felt like a hammer striking my fresh surgical incision. I held a pillow tight against my stomach, just like the discharge nurse had instructed, trying to keep my insides from tearing apart. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with pity. He asked if I wanted him to help me to the door. I told him no. Told him I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I needed to walk into my home and sleep in my own bed. I convinced myself that Dion was just stressed, that the divorce papers in the hospital were a cruel joke born of exhaustion. Surely once I got home, he would be there with soup and an apology. I stood on the front porch, the Georgia sun beating down on my neck. I reached into my purse for my keys, my fingers trembling from weakness and medication. I slid the key into the lock. It went in, but it would not turn. I jiggled it. I pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. It was a solid, unyielding metal stop. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the air conditioning in the ICU. I rang the doorbell. Once. Twice. The door swung open, but it was not Dayon. It was Sarah, his brother's wife. She was wearing a pair of white linen pants and holding a clipboard, looking like she was managing a chaotic event rather than greeting her sister-in-law, who had just donated an organ to her family. She did not move out of the doorway to let me in. She stood there blocking the entrance with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, hey, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice dripping with that fake southern charm that usually preceded an insult. You are out early. We thought they kept donors for at least a week. You look terrible, by the way. Really washed out. I need to come in. Sarah, I whispered, leaning against the doorframe for support. My stitches are burning. I just need to lie down. Sarah clicked her tongue and shook her head as if I were a child asking for candy before dinner. That is not going to work, Jasmine. Dion was pretty clear. The house is under new management now. We are in the middle of a transition, and frankly, having you here bleeding all over the place is not part of the plan. Before I could respond, two large men in blue coveralls squeezed past Sarah carrying my velvet armchair. They marched past me and dumped it unceremoniously onto the front lawn. It landed sideways in the dirt. Stop! I gasped, reaching out a hand. That is my chair. What are you doing? Sarah stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her, just enough to keep me out, but leaving it open enough for me to hear the sounds of my life being dismantled inside. We are decluttering, she said, making a note on her clipboard. Raven is moving in this weekend. She has a very specific vision. She likes things minimalist, Scandinavian, clean lines. Your stuff is just so heavy, and honestly a little cheap looking. It would just clash with the aesthetic she is going for. My breath hitched. My clothes, my books, the vase my grandmother gave me. They were all being categorized as trash to make room for the woman who stole my husband while I was on an operating table. Sarah, I said, my voice hardening despite the pain. I legally own half this house. You cannot just throw my things on the lawn. This is illegal. She laughed. It was a light tinkling sound that made my blood boil. Oh, honey. Dion said you would get all legal on us. Look, nobody wants a scene. We are just doing you a favor. Do you really want to come back inside and see Raven measuring drapes for your bedroom? We packed your essentials. They are in those black garbage bags over there by the mailbox. I looked at the curb. 3 black trash bags sat baking in the sun. That was it. 5 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life, reduced to trash bags. My knees buckled. The pain in my side was becoming unbearable. I needed my medication. I realized I had left my prescription bottle on the kitchen counter when the ambulance took me to the hospital initially. My medicine, I said, pointing to the door. I left my oxycodone on the island. I need it, now. Sarah raised an eyebrow. She turned and walked back into the house. For a moment I thought she was actually showing mercy. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a shred of humanity left in this family. She returned a moment later, holding the orange prescription bottle. I reached for it, relief flooding my chest. But Sarah did not hand it to me. She held it over the large outdoor trash can that the movers had dragged onto the porch. You know, I read an article the other day, she said, casually twirling the bottle between her fingers. It said that doctors overprescribe these things. They are so addictive. Besides, she looked me up and down, her blue eyes filled with a terrifying mix of ignorance and malice. Everyone knows your people have thicker skin. You do not feel pain the same way we do. You are built for it, right? It is genetic. She dropped the bottle. I watched in slow motion as the orange plastic container fell into the darkness of the trash can, landing with a hollow thud on top of coffee grounds and old takeout boxes. You do not need this, Sarah said, dusting off her hands. You are strong. That is what Dion always says. Jasmine is a workhorse. She will be fine. Now call an Uber. The moving truck is blocking the driveway and Raven will be here in an hour for the final walkthrough. We do not want to upset the bride, do we? She turned her back on me and walked inside, slamming the heavy oak door in my face. The sound echoed in my skull. For a full minute, I stood there staring at the wood grain of the door. The pain in my side was a screaming, white-hot agony, but the fire in my chest was hotter. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to suffer. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my comfort. Sarah thought she had broken me. She thought she had tossed away a junkie begging for pills. I gritted my teeth. I forced my body to move. I walked over to the trash can. I did not care how it looked. I reached in, pushing past the filth, and retrieved the bottle. I wiped it off on my shirt. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me collapse on this porch. I dry swallowed 2 pills right there. Then I looked at the pile of items the movers had dumped on the grass. Most of it was ruined. Frames cracked. Clothes soiled. But then I saw it. Sitting precariously on top of a box of winter coats was my laptop bag. Sarah had called my things cheap. She had been so focused on the furniture and the clothes, the visible trappings of wealth, that she had completely ignored the unassuming black leather satchel. To her it was just old electronics. To me it was the nuclear launch codes. That laptop contained everything. It had the access keys to the family trust. It had the spreadsheets detailing Dion's tax evasion schemes, which I had been trying to fix for years. It had the passwords to the offshore accounts he thought he had hidden from me. It had the digital trail of every dollar I had injected into this ungrateful family to keep them afloat. I walked over to the pile, every step a battle against gravity. I grabbed the laptop bag. It was heavy, pulling on my stitches, but I slung it over my shoulder. I grabbed the handle of one suitcase. I left the rest. I left the furniture. I left the clothes. I left the memories. I walked down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase clicking against the pavement. I did not look back at the house. I did not look back at the window where I knew Sarah was watching, probably laughing with the movers. Let them have the house. Let Raven hang her minimalist drapes. Let Dion sleep in the bed I bought. They thought they had thrown out the trash. They had no idea they had just handed me the weapon that would end them. As I reached the street, I pulled out my phone. My battery was at 4%. I had just enough power to make one call. I didn't call a taxi. I dialed the number of the one person Dion was terrified of. "Hello," a deep voice answered. "It is Jasmine," I said, my voice shaking, not from pain but from rage. "I have the files. I am ready to talk." The painkillers were starting to kick in, dulling the physical edge, but my mind was sharpening. I stood on the curb of the suburb that had never really accepted me, clutching the strap of my laptop bag. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns. Sarah was right about one thing. I was built to survive. But she was wrong about the pain. I felt it. I felt every bit of it. And I was going to make sure they felt it too. I turned my back on the house, and for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. The air in the studio apartment was thick with the smell of damp carpet and stale cigarette smoke from the previous tenant. It was a basement unit, the only thing I could afford on short notice, with a credit score that was rapidly plummeting thanks to the joint accounts Dion had frozen. I sat on the thin mattress I had dragged in from the curb, pressing a bag of frozen peas against my side. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. My incision felt like it was on fire, a constant throbbing reminder of the sacrifice I had made for a woman who called me damaged goods. I looked around the room. There was one small window near the ceiling that looked out onto a brick wall. A dripping faucet in the kitchenette provided a rhythmic soundtrack to my misery. Just 48 hours ago, I was sleeping in a 4-bedroom colonial house with Egyptian cotton sheets. Now I was in a concrete box that smelled like despair. But I did not cry. Crying would vibrate my abdominal muscles and tear my stitches. I could not afford to go back to the hospital, not when I had work to do. I pulled the black laptop bag onto my lap. It was heavy and the weight of it pressed against my tender stomach, but I welcomed the pressure. Sarah had called this computer old junk. She had been so busy throwing out my clothes and mocking my pain that she had failed to realize what this machine actually was. It was not just a computer. It was the central nervous system of the entire family financial structure. I was a senior claims adjuster. My job was to find lies in paperwork. My job was to follow the money. And for the last 5 years, I had managed every single cent that came in and out of Dion and Lucille's lives. I opened the laptop and the screen glowed blue in the dim room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, I logged into our primary checking account. I knew it would be bad, but I was not prepared for the brutality of the numbers. The balance blinked back at me. $0.42. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. I clicked on the transaction history. There it was. A wire transfer initiated yesterday while I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. $50,000 sent to Diamond District Jewelers. I stared at the screen. He did not just leave me. He did not just kick me out. He had taken our life savings, the money I had painstakingly saved for a down payment on a forever home, and used it to buy Raven an engagement ring. He used my money to propose to the woman he brought to my recovery room. It was blood money. My blood money. Rage is a funny thing. It can burn you up or it can clarify everything. I felt my heart rate slow down. The pain in my side receded into the background, replaced by a laser-sharp focus. If he wanted to play dirty, he had no idea who he was up against. I closed the banking tab. That money was gone for now, but I would get it back. I opened my work portal. Because I worked for the insurance company that covered Lucille's surgery, I had access to the back end of her medical file. I needed to check the status of the claims. But as I scrolled through the hundreds of documents, something caught my eye. It was a PDF file labeled Pre-Op Legal Directives. I clicked it open. My eyes widened. I remembered this moment. It was the morning of the surgery. Lucille had been terrified. She was convinced the doctors were going to botch the anesthesia, or that she would end up in a vegetative state. She had been screaming at the nurses, refusing to go under, until she had assurance that someone she trusted would make decisions if things went wrong. Sarah was not there yet. Dion was too busy parking the car. So Lucille, in her panic, had signed a durable power of attorney for healthcare. I scanned the document, my breath catching in my throat. It was standard procedure, but the wording was specific. It granted the proxy full authority over all medical decisions related to the transplant and any subsequent complications arising from the organ acceptance. And there at the bottom of the page, in shaky blue ink, was Lucille's signature. And next to it, listed as the sole primary advocate, was my name, Jasmine Williams. Sarah, in her arrogance and haste to get rid of me, had completely forgotten to revoke this document. She thought that once the kidney was inside Lucille, the transaction was over. She was wrong. Legally, this document remained valid until either Lucille revoked it in writing or I resigned. Neither of those things had happened. A cold smile spread across my face. I sat back against the peeling wall of the studio apartment. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought I was powerless, a discarded donor living in a basement. But they had made a fatal error. As long as that kidney was inside her body beating and filtering her blood, I was legally the person who decided what happened if anything went wrong. If there were complications, if she needed more meds, if she needed another surgery, the doctors would not call Dion. They would not call Sarah. They would call me. I looked at the revoke button on the screen. I could cancel it right now. I could wash my hands of this toxic family forever, but I did not click it. Instead, I saved a copy to my local drive and emailed it to my private secure server. Sarah thought she had kicked the fox out of the henhouse. She did not realize she had just handed the fox the keys and walked away. I closed the laptop. The pain in my side was still there, but it felt different now. It was not a wound anymore. It was a reminder. They took a part of me, but they forgot that I still held the remote control to their happy ending. I laid back on the lumpy mattress, and for the first time in 3 days, I slept peacefully. The game had just begun. The lobby of First National Bank smelled like old money and furniture polish. It was a smell I used to associate with safety, but now it just smelled like another battlefield. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, wincing as the leather dug into the tender flesh above my surgical incision. It had been 4 days since they cut me open, and walking still felt like a high-wire act. But I had to be here. I needed a paper trail. I needed an official bank stamp on a document stating that the joint account was closed and that I was no longer liable for the financial wreckage Dion was about to cause. I took a ticket from the machine and sat in one of the plush leather chairs in the waiting area. My eyes scanned the room. It was quiet, mostly elderly couples checking their retirement funds, and businessmen in suits making deposits. And then I saw them. At the loan officer desk in the far corner, sitting with their backs to me, were two familiar figures. One was broad-shouldered, wearing a navy blue suit that I knew cost $2,000 because I was the one who paid the credit card bill for it. The other was slender with long dark hair cascading down the back of a white silk blouse. Dion and Raven. My heart hammered against my ribs, a physical thud that echoed the throbbing in my side. I considered leaving. I considered walking out the heavy glass doors and coming back tomorrow. But then I saw Raven reach out and stroke Diana's arm, a gesture of comfort and possession that made bile rise in my throat. No, I was not running. I was done running. I stood up and walked toward the desk. The carpet muffled my footsteps so they did not hear me approach. "We just need a bridge loan," Dion was saying, his voice smooth and confident, the same voice he used to charm me 5 years ago. "Just $50,000 to cover some closing costs. The commission from the Meridian project is coming in next month, and it is going to be 7 figures. You can check my track record." The loan officer, a middle-aged woman with glasses named Mrs. Higgins, looked skeptical. She was typing something on her computer, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Williams, I see the projected income, but your current debt-to-income ratio is flagging in our system, and the recent activity on your joint account shows a significant depletion of assets. That is just a temporary restructuring," Dion said quickly, a bead of sweat appearing on his neck. "My wife and I are moving funds around for tax purposes." "Ex-wife," I said loud enough for the entire corner of the bank to hear. Dion spun around in his chair so fast I thought he might get whiplash. His eyes went wide, then immediately narrowed into slits of anger. Raven let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her designer purse to her chest, as if I were holding a knife instead of a folder of documents. Jasmine Dayon hissed, standing up. "What the hell are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting, or stalking me. Which one is it?" I ignored him and looked directly at Mrs. Higgins. "I am Jasmine Williams, the other name on that joint account, and I am here to inform the bank that there is no tax restructuring. My husband drained $50,000 without my consent to buy jewelry, and we are currently in the process of a divorce. I want to freeze the account immediately." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Mrs. Higgins looked from me to Dion, her eyes widening behind her glasses. "This is ridiculous," Dion laughed, but it was a nervous cracking sound. He turned to the loan officer, flashing his teeth in a smile that looked more like a snarl. "I am so sorry about this. She is incredibly emotional right now. She just had surgery and the medication makes her paranoid. She is delusional. Honestly, she is just jealous because I moved on." Raven chimed in, her voice shrill. "She has been harassing us non-stop. We might need to call security, babe. I do not feel safe." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced my voice to remain steady, cold as ice. "I am not on medication, Dion, and I am not jealous. I'm not. I am mitigating my liability." Dion stepped closer to me, towering over my smaller frame. He lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "You are embarrassing yourself, Jasmine. You think you can stop me? I am about to close the deal on the Meridian project. Do you hear me? The Meridian. I am going to be richer than you could ever dream. I do not need your little penny-pinching insurance salary anymore. I am going to buy and sell you 10 times over." He turned back to Mrs. Higgins, puffing out his chest. "Look, just approve the loan based on my future earnings. The Meridian project is a guaranteed gold mine. It is a luxury condo complex on the West Side riverfront. Prime real estate. The contracts are already drafted." My ears perked up. The Meridian project. The West Side riverfront. Time seemed to slow down. A memory flashed in my mind. 2 weeks ago at work, I had reviewed a risk assessment report for a massive development proposed for the West Side riverfront. The geological survey had come back with red flags. The land was unstable, It was a floodplain with a history of sinkholes. Our company had explicitly placed that entire zone on the Do Not Insure list. No insurance meant no bank financing. No bank financing meant no project. Dion did not know that I knew. He did not know that the $1 million deal he was banking his entire future on was effectively a pile of worthless mud. He was borrowing money he did not have based on a commission that would never arrive. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the desperation behind the arrogance. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was drowning, and he was trying to use me as a stepping stone one last time. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. "Go ahead, Dion," I said softly. "Tell her about the Meridian. I am sure it is a solid investment." Dion looked confused by my sudden capitulation, but his ego took over. "Exactly," he scoffed. "See, even she knows it. See? Even she." I turned to Mrs. Higgins. "I am submitting this affidavit formally requesting the freeze of the joint account ending in 459. Whatever loans Mr. Williams takes out from this moment forward are in his name solely." I wash my hands of it. Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly, taking the paper from my hand. "I will process this right away, Mrs. Williams. And Mr. Williams, regarding your loan application, we will need to run a secondary review given this new information." Dion slammed his hand on the desk. "This is sabotage. You are just bitter because nobody wants a scarred-up woman with one kidney. Security!" Mrs. Higgins called out, her voice sharp. 2 uniformed guards started walking toward us. Dion glared at me one last time, his face purple with rage. "You will regret this, Jasmine. When I am sitting in my penthouse, do not come crawling back." "Come on, babe," Raven said, pulling his arm. "Let us go to another bank. This place is trash, anyway." I watched them storm out, Raven struggling to keep up with Dion's angry strides. They looked like royalty, but I knew they were beggars in costume. I finished signing the paperwork with Mrs. Higgins. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline. As I walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun, I felt lighter. The joint account was dead. My financial tie to him was severed. But I was not done, not even close. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Marcus. He was an old college friend who now ran one of the most aggressive debt collection agencies in the state. They bought bad debt for pennies on the dollar and pursued it with the tenacity of pit bulls. I hit the call button. It rang twice. Jas Marcus's voice was surprised. "I haven't heard from you since the wedding. Is everything okay?" "I am fine, Marcus," I said, watching Dion's BMW peel out of the parking lot in the distance. "Better than fine. Listen, I have a tip for you. There is a portfolio of high-risk personal loans and soon-to-be defaulted credit cards under the name Dion Williams. He is currently leveraging assets he does not own for a real estate project that is about to be red-flagged by every insurer in the state." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low whistle. "That sounds messy. Why are you telling me this?" "Because," I said, my voice hardening as I touched the bandage on my side, "I happen to know he just missed a payment on his car note, and he is about to default on a bridge loan. If you buy his debt now, you can own him by next week." Marcus laughed, a dark, knowing sound. "You always were the smartest person in the room, Jazz. Send me the details." I hung up. The pain in my side flared up again, a sharp reminder of what I had lost. But as I hailed a cab to take me back to my damp basement apartment, I realized something. Dion was right about one thing. The Meridian project was going to be the end of everything. Just not in the way he thought. He was building his castle on quicksand, and I was the one who controlled the weather. Returning to the glass and steel tower of my corporate office felt like stepping onto a different planet. The air here was filtered cool and smelled faintly of expensive coffee and ambition. It was a stark contrast to the mildew scent of the basement studio I had woken up in. I adjusted my blazer, ensuring it covered the slight bulge of the bandage on my side, and walked to my desk. My colleagues offered polite smiles and vague welcome-back sentiments, unaware that the woman walking past them had been carved out and discarded by her family in the span of a week. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the mesh support providing a small mercy for my healing incision. I logged into my workstation, the dual monitors flickering to life. For the first hour, I did exactly what was expected of me. I reviewed claims. I denied a request for an experimental back surgery because the paperwork lacked a second opinion. I approved a routine MRI. I was efficient. I was professional. But my real work began at 10 o'clock. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the company internal benefits portal. As a senior executive in the claims department, my compensation package included the Platinum PPO plan. It was the Rolls-Royce of health insurance: zero deductible, out-of-network coverage, and crucially full coverage for specialty medications, including the immunosuppressants transplant recipients need to take for the rest of their lives to prevent organ rejection. I clicked on the tab labeled My Dependents. The screen refreshed, displaying two names listed under my coverage: Dion Williams' spouse, Lucille Williams' mother-in-law. Seeing their names there, shielded by my hard work and my company benefits, sent a surge of cold anger through my veins. They were living under the umbrella of my protection while leaving me out in the rain. I moved my mouse to the sidebar menu. I selected the option for qualifying life event. The system asked for the reason for the change in coverage. I scrolled down the drop-down menu: marriage, birth of a child, death, and there it was: legal separation. Technically, our divorce was not final. In the eyes of the state, we were still married. But Dion, in his arrogance and haste to hurt me, had filed for legal separation immediately to protect his future assets from me. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was fencing me out of his imaginary fortune. But he had forgotten that separation cuts both ways. In the state of Georgia, a legal separation is a valid trigger to remove a spouse and their relatives from your health insurance policy outside of the open enrollment period. I clicked the box next to Dion's name: remove. I clicked the box next to Lucille's name: remove. A pop-up window appeared on the screen, a standard system warning: you are about to remove dependents from your coverage. This will result in immediate termination of benefits. A COBRA notification will be mailed to their address on file. Are you sure you want to proceed? I paused for a fraction of a second. I thought about Lucille. I thought about the kidney inside her body, my kidney working hard to filter her blood. Without this insurance, the anti-rejection drug she needed would cost nearly $4,000 a month out of pocket. If she missed a dose, her body would start to attack the organ. She could get sick. She could die. Then I remembered her voice in the hospital room. I remembered her calling me damaged goods. I remembered Dion laughing as he signed the papers. They had made their choice. They had decided I was worthless. If I was worthless, then my insurance was worthless to them too. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. The list of dependents was now empty. Just Jasmine Williams, primary policyholder. It was done. I did not send them an email. I did not call them to warn them. The system would generate a letter that would arrive in 5 to 7 business days. By then, it would be too late. The next time Lucille walked into a pharmacy, she was going to face the real cost of betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a breath I did not know I was holding. My phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it, expecting a work email, but it was an Instagram notification. My algorithm, cruel as it was, had suggested a post for me. It was from Raven. I picked up the phone. I should have ignored it, but I needed to see. I needed fuel. The photo had been posted 20 minutes ago. It was high-resolution, filtered to perfection. Raven was wearing a white bikini, holding a flute of champagne, leaning against the railing of a boat. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Dion was behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, laughing at something off-camera. He looked carefree. He looked rich. The location tag read, Lake Lanier Yacht Club. The caption was a string of emojis: a diamond ring, a champagne bottle, a speedboat, and the text, "Living our best life. Unbothered. Blessed." I stared at the image. Dion had told the bank he was broke. He had told the judge in his filing that he could not afford spousal support because his assets were tied up. Yet here he was chartering a boat on a Tuesday, drinking Dom Perignon that cost $300 a bottle. He was celebrating. He was celebrating his freedom from me. He was celebrating the new chapter with the younger, prettier model. I did not feel the sting of jealousy. That emotion belonged to the old Jasmine, the one who wanted to be loved. The new Jasmine, the one with the empty space in her side, only saw data. I took a screenshot. I cropped it to show the timestamp and the location. I went to Raven's profile and scrolled back. There was a photo from dinner last night at a steakhouse where the minimum plate was $80. Screenshot. There was a story of Dion buying her a designer handbag. Screenshot. They were documenting their own lie. Every post was a piece of evidence. Every filtered smile was proof of perjury. If Dion claimed poverty in court, I would have 100 pages of glossy, high-definition rebuttal. I opened a folder on my work desktop labeled Litigation Assets and dragged the screenshots into it. "Let them have their champagne," I whispered to the empty office. "Let them enjoy the yacht. Because when Lucille walks up to that pharmacy counter tomorrow, Dion is going to wish he had saved that money instead of spending it on boat rentals and bubbly." I turned back to my dual monitors. I had a lot of work to do. I had to restructure my 401k to ensure Dion could not touch a dime of it. I had to update my beneficiary information to remove him from my life insurance. I was erasing him pixel by pixel, dollar by dollar. And the best part was, he was too busy toasting to his own greatness to notice the ground crumbling beneath his feet. The silence of the office was no longer lonely. It was the quiet hum of a machine powering up, ready to crush everything in its path. The invitation was not sent to my mailbox. It appeared on my timeline posted by a mutual friend who had not yet realized that picking a side in the Williams divorce meant picking a side in a war. It was an image of heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering that read, "A Celebration of Life. Lucille Williams. Second Chance." The venue was the grand ballroom of the Piedmont Driving Club, a place Dion had been trying to get a membership to for years. Clearly, he was burning through the cash he had stolen from our joint account to impress the Atlanta elite, using his mother recovery as a networking event for his failing real estate schemes. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my damp studio apartment. The air conditioner rattled in the window, but I did not hear it. I was too focused on the reflection staring back at me. I had chosen a dress for tonight that was the complete opposite of the modest, supportive wife I used to be. It was emerald green silk draped specifically to conceal the healing scar on my right side while accentuating everything else. I applied my lipstick, a deep shade of crimson that looked like war paint. I was not going there to cause a scene. I was going there to deliver a reality check. The valet at the country club raised an eyebrow when I pulled up in a rental sedan that had seen better days, but my confident stride as I tossed him the keys silenced any comment he might have made. I walked up the marble steps, the sound of a string quartet drifting through the open doors. Inside the room was a sea of white linens, white lilies, and people wearing pastel colors. It looked like an Easter Sunday service for millionaires. I paused at the top of the staircase, surveying the room. I saw them immediately. Dion was holding court near the open bar wearing a white tuxedo that made him look like a televangelist. Raven was clinging to his arm, dressed in a shimmering silver gown that plunged dangerously low. And there, sitting on a velvet throne in the center of the room, was Lucille. She looked radiant, holding a glass of sparkling cider, accepting compliments from neighbors who had ignored her when she was sick. They were celebrating the miracle of her health while the person who performed the miracle was living in a basement. I took a deep breath and began my descent. The clicking of my heels on the marble floor seemed to cut through the chatter. Heads began to turn. The whispers started like a ripple in a pond, spreading outward until they reached the center. First the guests, then the waiters, and finally the family. Dayon turned around, his smile freezing in place. His eyes bulged as he took in my appearance. For a second, I saw a flash of the old attraction, the way he used to look at me before he decided I was disposable. Then it was replaced by pure panic. He whispered something to Raven, who stiffened and glared at me with undisguised hatred. I did not stop walking until I was 10 feet away from Lucille's throne. The music faded into an awkward silence. The entire room was watching. "Well, look who decided to crash the party." The voice came from my left. Sarah stepped out from the crowd holding a glass of Chardonnay. She was wearing a floral dress that cost more than my current rent. She looked me up and down with a sneer, her eyes lingering on the side of my dress where she knew the scar was hiding. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Jasmine," Sarah said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "This is a private event for family and friends. You are neither." I looked at her calmly. "I am just here to pay my respects to the guest of honor, Sarah." Sarah laughed, a sharp barking sound that grated on my nerves. "Respects. Please, we all know why you are here. You are broke, you are bitter, and you want attention." "What is the matter, Jasmine? Did you come to ask for your kidney back?" A gasp went through the room. Several guests covered their mouths. Sarah smirked, thinking she had delivered the ultimate insult. She thought she had humiliated me. She had no idea she had just set the stage perfectly for my performance. I did not flinch. I did not get angry. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick red envelope. It was the color of a warning sign, the color of debt. "I'm not here to take anything, Sarah," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I am here to give." I realized that in the rush of the divorce, I forgot to give Lucille her housewarming gift for her new life. I stepped past Sarah, ignoring her attempt to block me, and walked straight to Lucille. My mother-in-law looked up at me, her eyes darting nervously to Dion for help. But Dion was paralyzed, watching the red envelope in my hand. "Hello, Lucille," I said softly. "You look healthy. My kidney must be working overtime." "Get out," Lucille hissed, her voice trembling. "You are ruining my night." I held out the envelope. "Open it. It is important." Lucille hesitated, then snatched the envelope from my hand, eager to get this over with so she could have security drag me out. She tore open the seal with her manicured fingers. She probably expected a desperate letter begging for reconciliation, or maybe a threat she could laugh at. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was not a letter. It was an official notification from the insurance provider. Attached to it was a billing statement from the specialty pharmacy. I watched her eyes scan the document. I saw the moment the words made sense. Notice of coverage termination, effective immediately. Qualifying life event, legal separation. And below that, the invoice for her monthly supply of tacrolimus and mycophenolate. $3,800.50. Due upon receipt. Lucille's face went from flushed to chalk white in seconds. Her hand started to shake, rattling the paper. "What is this?" she whispered, looking up at me with terror in her eyes. "It is your independence, Lucille," I said loud enough for Dion to hear. Since Dion insisted on a legal separation to protect his assets, I decided to respect his wishes. "You are no longer a dependent on my corporate insurance policy. That is the bill for the medication keeping you alive. And since you are pre-existing and Dion is self-employed with no benefits, I suggest you start a GoFundMe." Dion rushed forward, grabbing the paper from his mother's hand. He read it, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "You cannot do this. This is murder." "It is policy, Dion," I said, stepping back as he advanced. "You wanted to cut ties. Consider them cut. Enjoy the party. I hope the champagne is worth $3,000 a bottle, because that is what your mom's meds cost every 30 days. I turned on my heel and began to walk away. The room was deathly silent, save for the heavy breathing of the woman on the throne. Suddenly, a loud wheezing sound broke the silence. I paused and looked back. Lucille was clutching her chest, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide and frantic. "I cannot breathe," she choked out. "My chest, it is tight." Dion dropped the paper and fell to his knees beside her. Mom. Mom. Breathe. Someone call 911. Raven stood there uselessly checking her phone as if wondering if this would affect her follower count. Sarah looked at me, her face twisted in shock. I watched them panic. I knew exactly what was happening. It was not organ rejection. It was a panic attack. It was the physical manifestation of the realization that the free ride was over. But I did not step in. I did not offer to help. I had the medical proxy in my bag, the power to take control, but I let them sweat. I walked out of the ballroom doors, the sound of Dion screaming for an ambulance fading behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time since the surgery, I took a deep, full breath without pain. The scar on my side throbbed once a phantom acknowledgement of the chaos I had left behind. I got into my rental car and drove away, leaving them to figure out how to pay for an ambulance ride that was definitely out of network. The fluorescent lights of the pharmacy buzzed with a low and irritating hum that seemed to amplify the tension radiating from the trio standing at the counter. It was the day after the party, and the reality of my red envelope was about to hit them in the most practical and painful way possible. I was not there physically, but thanks to the tracking app on the shared family cloud account, they had forgotten to remove me from I knew exactly where they were. I sat in my office chair, watching the little blue dot hovering over the CVS on Peachtree Street, and I could almost hear the sound of their entitlement shattering. Lucille stood at the counter tapping her manicured nails impatiently on the glass. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, trying to look like a celebrity, trying to go incognito. But she just looked like a woman who was about to have a very bad day. Dayon stood behind her, scrolling through his phone, probably checking to see if his latest fake press release about the Meridian project had gained any traction. Raven was examining a display of lip glosses, looking bored and detached, as if running errands for her boyfriend's sick mother was beneath her pay grade. "I need to pick up my refill," Lucille said, sliding her ID across the counter without looking at the pharmacist. "It is under Williams." "Lucille. The anti-rejection meds. And hurry up. I have a brunch reservation in 20 minutes. The pharmacist, a young man named Kevin who looked exhausted, typed her name into the system. He frowned, squinting at the screen. He typed again, hitting the enter key with a bit more force. "Miss Williams, I am seeing an alert here on your profile," Kevin said, his voice professional but wary. Lucille rolled her eyes. "What alert?" "Just give me the pills. It says your primary insurance coverage has been terminated effective yesterday," Kevin said. "The claim was rejected by the payer." "That is ridiculous," Lucille snapped, finally taking off her sunglasses. "My daughter-in-law works for the insurance company. There must be a glitch in the system. Just override it." "I cannot override a termination," ma'am, Kevin replied. "The code is specific. Qualifying life event. Legal separation. You are no longer covered under the policyholder plan." Dion looked up from his phone, stepping forward. "Look, buddy, just run it again. We do not have time for this incompetence. I can process it as a cash transaction," Kevin offered. "But these are specialty medications. They are Tier 4 drugs. Without insurance, the out-of-pocket cost is significant." "Fine, whatever." Dion waved his hand dismissively. "Just tell us the damage so we can leave." Kevin typed a few more keys and looked up. "The total for a 30-day supply of both medications comes to $4,215.80. The silence that followed was louder than the pharmacy intercom. Lucille gripped the counter for support. Raven dropped the lip gloss she was holding. Dion's jaw literally dropped. $4,000, Dion shouted, causing the woman behind him in line to jump. "That is robbery. That is extortion. That is the market price without insurance," Kevin said calmly. "Do you want to proceed with the payment?" Dion glared at the pharmacist, his face turning that familiar shade of angry purple. "Of course we are paying. My mother needs these to live. Do you think we are broke?" He reached into his wallet and pulled out his platinum credit card. "The one linked to the joint account. The one he had used to buy Raven is champagne yesterday. He slapped it onto the counter with a flourish of arrogance that was almost impressive given the circumstances. "Run it," Dion commanded. Kevin took the card and inserted it into the chip reader. The machine whirred. Dion tapped his foot, looking at Raven with a smug smile, silently promising her that this little hiccup was nothing he could not handle. Beep! The machine flashed a red light. Transaction declined. Kevin looked at the screen. "It says declined, sir. Do you have another form of payment?" Dion laughed nervously. "That is a mistake. Run it again. It is a platinum card. The limit is 50,000. Kevin sighed but complied. He inserted the card again. Beep. Declined. "Try this one," Dion said, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. He pulled out a second card. This was his business card for his real estate LLC. Beep. Declined. I had frozen that one too. Since his business loan was secured by our marital home, I had flagged it as a disputed asset with the credit bureau just hours ago. "Sir, the line is getting long," Kevin said, his patience wearing thin. Lucille started to hyperventilate. "Dion, do something. I need my medicine. My side hurts. I can feel it rejecting me." Dion turned to Raven. "Babe, let me use your card. I will transfer the money to you as soon as we get to the car. My accounts are just flagged because of the large purchase yesterday. You know how banks are." Raven took a step back, her eyes narrowing. "You want me to pay 4 grand, Dion? That is my rent money for my apartment in the city. I will pay you back double," Dion hissed, grabbing her arm. "Do not embarrass me right now. Look at my mother. She is dying." Raven looked at Lucille, who was putting on a theatrical performance of a woman on death's door. She looked at the line of people staring at them. She looked at Dion, sweating and desperate. With a heavy sigh of pure resentment, she reached into her designer bag and pulled out a sleek black card. "Fine, Raven," said her voice dripping with ice. "But you are transferring it back before we even order brunch." She tapped her card. The machine beeped. Approved. They walked out of the pharmacy with a small paper bag that cost as much as a used car. The tension between them was palpable even from miles away. My phone rang 10 minutes later. I knew it was coming. I set my tea down on the desk and pressed the record button on my laptop before answering. I put the call on speaker. "Hello, Dion," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. "You are sick," Dion screamed. The sound of his voice was distorted by rage and the wind rushing past his car window. "You are actually sick in the head. You cut off my mother's insurance. You tried to kill her. Do you know how much we just had to pay?" I took a sip of my tea. "I assume you paid the standard retail price." "What is the problem, Dion?" "You told everyone at the bank yesterday that you are rich. You told the judge you have plenty of assets. $4,000 should be pocket change for a big-shot developer like you." "I am going to sue you," Dion roared. "I am going to sue you for elder abuse. I am going to sue you for attempted murder." "You wanted a separation." I interrupted, my tone hardening. "You wanted to split our lives. This is what a split looks like. You take your mother and I take my benefits. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot treat me like trash and expect me to subsidize your life." Dion was sputtering now. But you know I do not have liquidity right now. The Meridian deal has not closed yet." "And whose fault is that?" I asked. "Maybe you should ask Raven to pay for next month too. Although judging by how much she loves designer shoes, I doubt she will stick around to pay your bills for long." "Do not bring her into this," Dion yelled. "You are just jealous because she is everything you are not." "You are right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "She is currently $4,000 poorer than I am." I hung up the phone. I saved the recording and labeled it evidence of financial capability. If he could scream at me, he could afford to pay. And if Raven was paying his bills, it proved that his lifestyle was being funded by third parties, which would destroy his claim for spousal support. I looked at the blue dot on the screen. It had stopped at a brunch spot, but I doubted they had much of an appetite. The first crack in the foundation had appeared. Raven had been forced to open her wallet for a woman she barely knew to cover the mistakes of a man who promised her the world. I knew that feeling. I had lived it for 5 years. But unlike me, Raven was not loyal. She was transactional. And Dion had just missed a payment. The clock was ticking, and I was holding the only stopwatch that mattered. 2 weeks. That was exactly how long it took for the fairy tale romance between Dion and Raven to turn from champagne toasts on a yacht to screaming matches in a leased BMW. I knew the timeline because I was tracking the spending habits of the one credit card Dion had managed to keep active, a high-interest emergency card he had opened years ago and forgotten about. For the first week, there were charges for dinners and spa treatments, desperate attempts to keep Raven happy. But by the second week, the charges shifted. Grocery stores, gas stations, the bare minimum. The $4,000 monthly bleed for Lucille's medication was not just a bill. It was a hemorrhage that was draining the life out of their relationship. Raven was not a woman built for budgeting. She was a luxury item, and luxury items require maintenance. I imagined the scene in their apartment vividly. Raven standing in her walk-in closet, pulling out a designer dress, only to be told they were staying in tonight because Dion needed to save cash for the next pharmacy run. I knew Raven. She measured love in receipts. If Dion could not buy her things, he did not love her. And right now, Dion could barely afford to love himself. The cracks started to show publicly on social media. The daily posts of their glamorous life stopped. Raven posted a vague, passive-aggressive quote about knowing your worth and not settling for less. Dion posted nothing. He was too busy trying to juggle debts that I had set on fire. But the real explosion happened when Dion went to the one person he thought would always have his back: his family. I learned about the meeting from my old neighbor Mrs. Gable, who lived next door to Sarah. Mrs. Gable spent her retirement gardening and watching everything that happened on the street. She told me Dion's car had pulled into Sarah's driveway late one Tuesday night, and the shouting could be heard from the sidewalk. Dion had gone to Sarah to ask for a loan. It made sense. Sarah and his brother Marcus lived in a large house in the suburbs. They drove new cars. They went on ski trips to Aspen. Surely they could spare a few $1,000s to help their mother stay alive. But I knew something Dion did not. Sarah's wealth was leveraged to the hilt. She was just as broke as he was, she just hid it better behind a facade of suburban perfection. I reconstructed the conversation later, but I knew exactly how it went. Dion probably sat at their granite kitchen island, his head in his hands, admitting that he was drowning. He probably asked for $10,000 just to cover 2 months of meds and get some breathing room. He probably played the family card, reminding Sarah that Lucille was Marcus's mother too. And Sarah, with her cold, calculating eyes, would have poured herself a glass of wine and shut him down. I could hear her voice in my head, that condescending tone she used whenever she wanted to avoid responsibility. "Dion, honey, you know we would love to help," she would have said. "But our liquid assets are completely tied up in investments right now. We are diversifying our portfolio. We cannot just pull cash out without penalties. Besides, Mom is technically your responsibility right now. You are the oldest son. And honestly, if you hadn't upset Jasmine so much, maybe she wouldn't have cut the insurance. This is really a mess of your own making." It was the ultimate betrayal. The woman who had encouraged Dion to leave me, the woman who had called me damaged goods, was now refusing to spend a dime to fix the problem she helped create. She was happy to enjoy the benefits of kicking me out, but she refused to pay the bill. Dion must have been furious. He realized then that he was alone. His mother was sick and expensive. His girlfriend was high maintenance and bored. His sister-in-law was stingy and selfish. And the one person who had supported him for 5 years, the woman with the spreadsheet and the steady paycheck, was gone. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Dion and Sarah were cornered. They could not fix their financial problem, so they decided to attack the source of their misery: me. If they could not make me pay for the insurance, they would make me pay with my career. They sat in that kitchen nursing their grievances and hatched a plan so vile it could only come from people who had lost their moral compass. They decided that if I lost my job, I would lose my power. If I was disgraced, maybe the court would pity Dayon and grant him access to my assets again. Or maybe they just wanted to see me hurt. They wrote the letter that night. It was an anonymous email sent to the chief ethics officer of my insurance firm. They used a burner account, but the syntax was pure Sarah. The email claimed that I, Jasmine Williams, a senior claims adjuster, was abusing my position to steal opioids. It alleged that following my surgery, I had developed a severe addiction to painkillers. It claimed I was erratic, unstable, and making fraudulent decisions on claims to cover up my drug use. It even suggested that I had performed the kidney donations solely to get access to high-grade narcotics. It was a lie so specific and hateful that it was designed to bypass HR and go straight to internal affairs. In the corporate world, an accusation of substance abuse and fraud is a death sentence. It triggers immediate suspension pending investigation. It stains your reputation forever. They hit send, clinking their wine glasses, thinking they had won. They thought this was the kill shot. They thought I would be blindsided, dragged into a meeting room, stripped of my badge, and escorted out of the building in tears. They imagined me unemployed, desperate, and unable to fight them in court. I was sitting at my desk the next morning when my boss, Mr. Henderson, called me into his office. His face was grave. He closed the door, and blinds a sign that this was serious. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. "Jasmine, we received a disturbing communication this morning," Mr. Henderson said, sliding a printed copy of the email across his desk. "It makes some very serious allegations about your conduct and your health." I picked up the paper. I read the words Sarah and Dion had written. I saw the phrases Sarah loved to use, like erratic behavior and moral failing. I saw the desperation in every sentence. I looked up at Mr. Henderson. He was watching me closely. I did not cry. I did not get defensive. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I had prepared days ago. "Mr. Henderson," I said calmly, "I anticipated this might happen. My ex-husband and his family are currently under significant financial duress because I removed them from my insurance policy. They have threatened to ruin me if I did not reinstate them." I opened the folder. Inside were the results of a voluntary 10-panel drug test I had taken at an independent lab just yesterday. I had done it because I knew them. I knew they would try to play the drug card. I also included the voicemails from Dion screaming threats and the text messages from Sarah harassing me about money. "I am clean, sir," I said, sliding the negative drug test result across the desk. "And this email is a retaliatory attempt to intimidate a witness in an ongoing divorce proceeding. It is harassment. And since they used a server that can be traced back to Sarah's home IP address, it is also cyber stalking." Mr. Henderson looked at the drug test. Then he looked at the email. His expression shifted from suspicion to anger. But the anger was not directed at me. "I am sorry you are going through this, Jasmine," he said, shredding the email. "We do not tolerate external intimidation of our employees. Do you want legal to get involved?" I smiled. "No, sir. I will handle this. But I would like a copy of that email for my records. It will be very useful in court." I walked out of his office with the evidence in my hand. Dion and Sarah had tried to nuke my career. Instead, they had just handed me the ammunition to prove malice. They wanted to paint me as an addict. I was going to paint them as criminals. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dion. "Hope you are having a good day at work. Heard HR can be tough." I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "HR is great. By the way, tell Sarah she should use a VPN next time she tries to frame someone. My lawyer loves it when you make it this easy." I watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear. He did not reply. He knew. He knew the missile had missed and it was coming back to hit them. The war was getting dirty, but they were fighting with mud. I was fighting with steel, and I was just getting started. Mr. Henderson shredded the physical copy of the email, the sound of the paper tearing echoing in the quiet office like a final judgment, but I kept the digital copy saved on my encrypted drive. That piece of paper was not just a failed attack. It was a declaration of total war. Up until this morning, I had been playing defense. I had been reactive, cutting off insurance only after they insulted me, freezing accounts only after they stole from me. I had been trying to minimize damage. But Dion and Sarah had just tried to destroy my livelihood. They tried to take away the career I had built for 15 years. They tried to brand me as a drug addict in a database that would follow me for the rest of my life. They broke the unwritten rule of engagement. You do not touch a person's paycheck. I walked back to my cubicle, my heels clicking on the carpet with a rhythm that felt different. It was heavier, more deliberate. I sat down and looked at the picture of Dion and me that I still hadn't removed from my desk. In the photo, he was smiling that charming, empty smile, his arm draped around me like I was a prop. He looked so confident. He looked like a man who thought he held all the cards because he was the man, and I was just the wife who handled the paperwork. He forgot that the person who handles the paperwork is the person who knows where the bodies are buried. I opened a new window on my laptop. It was time for Plan B. Plan B was something I had created 7 years ago, long before I met Dion. It was a limited liability company called Jasmine Holdings. I had set it up when I started dabbling in investment properties with a small inheritance from my grandmother. Over the years, I had used it to buy tax liens and distressed debt. It was my secret nest egg, my safety net that I never spoke about. Dayon knew I was good with money, but he thought my financial acumen was limited to finding coupons and maximizing credit card points. He had no idea that I was a sophisticated investor with a portfolio that could swallow his little real estate commissions whole. I logged into the county recorder's office website. I typed in the address of our marital home, 42 Oak Street. The search results populated instantly. I scanned the document history. The deed was in both our names, but the mortgage was the interesting part. It was a jumbo loan taken out 5 years ago to support the lifestyle Dion insisted we deserved. The monthly payment was nearly $5,000. I knew for a fact that Dion had not made a payment in 3 months. How did I know? Because for 5 years I was the one who logged in on the first of the month and clicked send. Since the day I woke up in that hospital bed, I hadn't paid a dime. And Dion, in his scramble to buy champagne and pay for his mother's medication, had definitely prioritized his image over his shelter. I switched tabs to the bank's foreclosure listing portal. There it was. 42 Oak Street. Status: pre-foreclosure. Notice of default filed 3 days ago. A shark smells blood in the water. I smelled opportunity. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a long time. It was the direct line to the loss mitigation department of the regional bank that held our mortgage. I did not call as Jasmine Williams, the scorned wife. I called as the managing partner of Jasmine Holdings. This is Ms. Williams representing Jasmine Holdings. I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming professional and detached. I am looking at a non-performing note in your portfolio. Reference number 772. I understand the borrower is 90 days delinquent and you are preparing for foreclosure proceedings. The bank officer on the other end checked the file. He sounded tired. Banks hate foreclosures. It costs them money in legal fees, maintenance, and time. They would always rather sell the bad debt to an investor for quick cash than go through the hassle of evicting a family. We are preparing to file. Yes, the officer said. Are you interested in purchasing the assignment of mortgage? I am, I said, staring at the picture of Dion on my desk. I am prepared to offer a lump sum wire transfer today to purchase the note at full face value of the remaining principal. There was a silence on the other end. Usually investors try to negotiate a discount, but I didn't care about saving 10%. I cared about speed. I needed to own that debt before Dion realized what was happening. Full face value, the officer asked, sounding surprised. You want to buy the debt today? Immediately, I confirmed. Send over the assignment agreement. My legal team is ready to review and wire the funds within the hour. The next 45 minutes were a blur of digital signatures and authorization codes. I watched my personal investment account balance drop significantly as the wire went through. It was a terrifying amount of money to spend in one afternoon. It was my entire life savings, everything I had built before Dion. But then the confirmation email arrived. Assignment of mortgage recorded. Holder in due course Jasmine Holdings, LLC. I sat back in my chair and let the reality wash over me. I felt a shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Dion did not own his house anymore. The bank did not own his house anymore. I owned it. Technically, I was now his lender. I was the one he owed money to every month. I was the one who held the power to let him stay or kick him out. And since he was 90 days behind on payments, I had the legal right to accelerate the loan. That meant I could demand the entire balance be paid in full immediately, or I could take the house. I looked at the clock. It was just after lunch. Dion was probably sitting in that house right now, maybe in the home office I had decorated, plotting his next move with Sarah. He probably thought the worst thing that could happen today was a call from a bill collector. He had no idea that the bill collector was his ex-wife, and she was coming for the keys. I opened a fresh Word document. I typed a new letter. It was not an email to HR, it was a formal notice of acceleration and intent to foreclose. Dear Mr. Williams, please be advised that Jasmine Holdings LLC has purchased the mortgage note for the property located at 42 Oak Street. You are currently in default of your obligations under the promissory note. The total amount of $15,000 in back payments is due immediately. Failure to remit payment within 48 hours will result in the immediate commencement of eviction proceedings. Govern yourself accordingly. I printed the letter. I signed it with my corporate signature. I put it in a crisp white envelope. I did not mail it. This was a message that needed to be delivered in person, but not by me. Not yet. I called a process server, a large man named Tiny who looked like he could bench press a truck. Tiny, I said, I have a priority service for you. 42 Oak Street. The guy might get aggressive. He thinks he owns the place. Tiny laughed. They all think they own the place until they see the paperwork. I hung up the phone and turned back to my computer. I pulled up the security camera feed for the front porch of the house. I had lost access to the inside cameras when Dion changed the Wi-Fi password, but the doorbell camera was hardwired to my personal cloud account. He had never been tech-savvy enough to figure that out. I watched the live feed. The house looked peaceful. The lawn was getting a little long, a sign that the landscaper hadn't been paid either. Raven's car was in the driveway. They were in there living in my asset, breathing my air. I imagined the look on Dion's face when he opened the door and saw the foreclosure notice. I imagined him calling the bank, screaming at some poor customer service representative, only to be told, "Sir, we sold your mortgage this morning. You need to contact the new lien holder." And when he asked who the new lien holder was, they would tell him, Jasmine Holdings. He might not recognize the name immediately, but Sarah would. Sarah, who thought she was so smart, so thorough. She would remember that name from the financial disclosures she had skimmed over during the prenuptial discussions 5 years ago, the ones she told Dion to ignore because my assets were negligible. I closed my laptop. The office was buzzing with the afternoon rush, phones ringing, keyboards clacking. Life was going on as normal for everyone else. But for me, the world had shifted on its axis. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the discarded wife. I was the bank. And the bank always wins. I packed up my things early. Mr. Henderson saw me leaving and gave me a sympathetic nod, thinking I was going home to cry about the drug accusations. He didn't know I was going home to prepare for court. Dion had filed a lawsuit demanding alimony. He claimed he was destitute. He claimed he needed my support to maintain his standard of living. I smiled as I pressed the elevator button. I couldn't wait for the court date. I couldn't wait for his lawyer to stand up and demand spousal support. Because when they did, I was going to lay the deed to his house on the judge's bench. You want support, Dion? I whispered to the empty elevator car. I am supporting you right now. I am providing the roof over your head, But rent is due, and you are about to find out that your landlord is a lot less forgiving than your wife was. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. I walked out into the sunshine, the envelope with the foreclosure notice burning a hole in my bag. Plan B was active. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent that usually signaled boredom, but today it smelled like a trap. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped loosely in my lap, watching the performance of a lifetime unfolding before me. Dion sat across the aisle, but the man sitting there bore no resemblance to the arrogant spendthrift who had thrown a platinum credit card on a pharmacy counter 2 weeks ago. Gone was the tailored Italian suit. Gone was the flashy watch. Today, Dion was wearing a gray suit that looked 2 sizes too big with a frayed collar and scuffed shoes. He sat with his shoulders hunched, head bowed, the very picture of a broken man crushed by the weight of a cruel world. It was brilliant, really. If I didn't know he had a closet full of designer clothes and a leased luxury car parked 3 blocks away to avoid being seen, I might have felt sorry for him myself. His lawyer, a man named Mr. Finch, who had a reputation for being loud and aggressive, was pacing in front of the judge. He was painting a portrait of me that was so villainous, it was almost impressive. According to Mr. Finch, I was not a victim of abandonment. I was a cold, calculating corporate executive who had used my husband for his connections, drained his resources, and then discarded him the moment his mother fell ill. Your Honor, Mr. Finch boomed, gesturing dramatically toward Dion. My client is a man of integrity who has been reduced to poverty by the vindictive actions of his estranged wife. He has sacrificed his own career opportunities to become the primary caregiver for his invalid mother. He has no income, he has no savings. And yet, Mrs. Williams, who earns a 6-figure salary and sits on a throne of corporate benefits, refuses to provide even the basic spousal support required by law. She has even gone so far as to terminate his mother's life-saving health insurance in a fit of jealous rage. I felt my own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca, stiffen beside me. She started to rise to object, but I placed a hand on her arm. Not yet. Let them dig the hole deeper. I wanted every lie on the record. I wanted the transcript to be overflowing with perjury. Mr. Finch called his first witness. Sarah. The doors opened and Sarah walked in. She had toned down her usual suburban glam for the occasion. She wore a modest navy cardigan and no jewelry. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, making her look younger and more vulnerable. She took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and then immediately launched into a sob story that would have made a soap opera writer blush. Can you describe the defendant's behavior toward your mother-in-law? Mr. Finch asked gently. Sarah pulled a tissue from her sleeve and dabbed at dry eyes. It was horrific. Jasmine changed after the surgery. She became abusive. She would yell at Mom, telling her she was a burden. She said. Sarah choked back a fake sob, looking directly at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes. She said she regretted giving the kidney and wished she could take it back. She called Mom a parasite. A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge, an older man with stern eyebrows named Judge Holloway, looked at me with undisguised distaste. He was buying it. He saw a crying woman protecting her family and a stone-faced defendant who refused to show emotion. He looked at me over his glasses. Mrs. Williams, these are serious allegations. Abandonment of a vulnerable adult is not looked upon kindly in this court. I remained silent. I picked up my pen and wrote a single word on my legal pad. Perjury. Sarah continued her testimony, gaining confidence as she saw the judge's reaction. She claimed that Dion had been forced to use his personal savings to pay for medical bills because I had blocked access to funds. She claimed that I had threatened to evict them from the family home. She painted a picture of a family under siege holding on to each other for survival while the wicked witch tried to burn their house down. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Sarah was using every stereotype available: the devoted son, the fragile mother, the greedy, heartless career woman. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make Dayon look like a martyr, and Dayon played his part perfectly. Every time Sarah mentioned his sacrifices, he would wipe a tear from his eye, looking down at his hands, as if ashamed of his own goodness. It was sickening, it was infuriating, but mostly it was evidence. When Sarah finally stepped down, she shot me a quick, triumphant look. It was subtle, just a flicker of a smirk, but I saw it. She thought she had nailed the coffin shut. She thought that by character assassinating me, she had guaranteed Dion a fat alimony check that they could split later. Mr. Finch rested his case. He looked at the judge with a somber expression. Your Honor, we are asking for temporary spousal support in the amount of $5,000 a month, retroactive to the date of separation, to allow Mr. Williams to maintain his household and care for his ailing mother. It is the only fair outcome. Judge Holloway nodded slowly, shuffling the papers on his bench. He looked ready to rule. He looked ready to lecture me on the duties of marriage and the moral obligation to family. He cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on me. Mrs. Williams, he began, his voice stern. I must say, the testimony I have heard today paints a very disturbing picture. While the court cannot mandate affection, it can mandate financial equity. It appears your husband is in a dire situation due to circumstances beyond his control. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:45 a.m. The foreclosure notice had been served by Tiny exactly 2 hours ago. The timing was impeccable. I nudged Rebecca. She nodded, standing up slowly. She buttoned her blazer and walked to the center of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She held a single blue folder in her hand. Your Honor, Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a blade. Before you issue a ruling on financial need, the defense would like to present new evidence regarding the plaintiff's assets and living situation. Mr. Finch jumped up. Objection. We have already submitted full financial disclosures. This is a stalling tactic. It is not stalling, Your Honor, Rebecca said calmly, opening the folder. It is rebuttal evidence that directly contradicts the testimony given by Mr. Williams and Mrs. Sarah Williams regarding the plaintiff's housing status and debts. Judge Holloway paused. He looked at Dion, who was suddenly shifting in his seat, looking nervous. He looked at Rebecca, who stood firm. I will allow it, the judge said. But make it quick, counselor. Rebecca pulled out a document. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a credit card bill. It was a certified copy of a deed transfer and a notice of acceleration. Your Honor. Rebecca began holding the document up. The plaintiff claims he requires support to maintain the marital residence at 42 Oak Street. He claims he is the owner of said property and is struggling to pay the mortgage. However, as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, that mortgage no longer belongs to the bank. Dion frowned, confusion clouding his face. Sarah leaned forward in the gallery, her eyes narrowing. Rebecca walked to the witness stand and placed the document in front of the judge. The mortgage note for 42 Oak Street was purchased in full this morning by a private investment firm. The plaintiff is currently 90 days delinquent on payments. But the most relevant fact for this court is the identity of the new lien holder. She turned and pointed at me. The mortgage is now owned by Jasmine Holdings LLC, the sole proprietor of which is the defendant Jasmine Williams. Mr. Williams does not owe money to a bank, Your Honor. He owes it to his wife, and he is currently living in her asset rent-free while suing her for support. The courtroom went silent. Absolute dead silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the gasp that escaped Sarah's lips. Dion's face went from confused to pale white. He looked at his lawyer, Mr. Finch looked at the document, then at me, realizing he had walked into a trap he didn't even know existed. Rebecca continued, her voice ringing out with satisfaction. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have just served the plaintiff with a foreclosure notice. Since Mr. Williams has testified under oath that he has no income and no savings, he has effectively admitted on public record that he cannot cure the default. Therefore, he is not a dependent in need of support. He is a squatter in my client's property. I looked at Dayon. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the fake tragedy mask slipping to reveal pure, unadulterated terror. He realized in that moment that the game was not checkers. It wasn't even chess. I was playing Monopoly and I owned the entire board. Judge Holloway looked up from the document. The disgust was gone from his face, replaced by a look of shock and intrigue. He looked at Dion, then at the document, then back at Dion. Mr. Finch, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. Did your client fail to disclose that his wife effectively owns his debt? I was not aware, Your Honor, Mr. Finch stammered, backing away from his own client. I sat back in my chair, smoothing my skirt. The silence in the room was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Sarah was frozen in the gallery. Dion was trembling. The frail mother narrative had just been crushed by the weight of a mortgage note. They wanted to talk about money, fine. Let's talk about who really owns the roof over their heads. The silence in the courtroom was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a tornado touches down. Judge Holloway held the document my lawyer had placed on his bench, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Every scratch of the paper as he turned the page sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dayon was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, a look of utter confusion warring with the panic rising in his eyes. He did not understand. He knew real estate, or at least he pretended to, but he did not understand how the bank could just disappear and be replaced by his wife. Mr. Finch, his lawyer, was the first to break the paralysis. He leaned over the table, his voice a frantic whisper. What is this, Dion? You told me the mortgage was with Wells Fargo. You told me it was standard. It was. Dion stammered, his voice cracking loud enough for the back row to hear. I took out a second lien last year to fund the startup costs for the Meridian project. It was a standard bank loan. She is lying. She cannot own my house. That is illegal. Judge Holloway looked up. His face was unreadable, which was worse than being angry. He took off his glasses and looked directly at Dion. Mr. Williams, are you aware that mortgage notes are transferable assets? Are you aware that when a borrower falls significantly behind on payments, banks often sell that distressed debt to private investors to recoup their losses? Dion blinked. I know that, but He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is just a claims adjuster. She does not have the money to buy a mortgage. This is a trick. She forged it. My lawyer, Rebecca, did not even look up from her notes. She simply slid another piece of paper across the table to the court clerk. Your Honor, this is the proof of funds and the wire transfer confirmation from Jasmine Holdings LLC dated yesterday morning. The funds were verified. The assignment was recorded with the county clerk at 9:15 a.m. It is a matter of public record. The judge looked at the receipt. He looked at the amount. It was a number that represented every penny I had saved, invested, and compounded over 15 years of living below my means, while Dion played billionaire. It appears to be in order, Judge Holloway said, his voice cold. The mortgage for the property at 42 Oak Street is indeed held by Jasmine Holdings. Dion slammed his hand on the table. Who is Jasmine Holdings? It is a shell company. It is fraud. I stood up. I did not ask for permission. I just stood smoothing the front of my blazer. I looked Dion right in the eye. Sit down, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Finch barked. I ignored him. Jasmine Holdings is not a shell company. Dion, I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room where Raven sat frozen. It is the investment firm I started 7 years ago with the inheritance from my grandmother. You know the money you told me to spend on a new car? The money you said was too small to matter. I invested it. I grew it. And while you were busy spending our paycheck on leases and dinners to impress people who do not care about you, I was building a safety net. I took a step closer to the aisle. And regarding the house, You took out that second mortgage without telling me. You forged my signature on the consent form, which is a felony, by the way. But I am not even pressing charges for that yet. I am simply acting as a business owner. You haven't made a payment in 90 days. You are in default. Dion turned to the judge, his face sweating profusely. Your Honor, I can pay. I just need a little time. The Meridian deal. There is no Meridian deal. I cut him off. My company uninsurable list killed that project 3 days ago. You have no income, you have no prospects, and now you have no landlord who will look the other way. I picked up the foreclosure notice from the defense table and held it up. It was a stark white piece of paper that represented the end of his delusions. Dion. I said, my voice dropping to a register that was almost intimate. A whisper that carried the weight of a sledgehammer. You are suing me for $5,000 a month in alimony because you say you need to maintain your lifestyle. But here is the reality. You are living in my house, you are sleeping under a roof that I own, and you are 3 months behind on rent. I let that sink in. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. You do not need alimony, Dion. You need a moving truck. Because as of this morning I have officially accelerated the loan. The full balance of $450,000 is due immediately. Since you cannot pay it, I am initiating foreclosure proceedings. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives to escort you out. The courtroom erupted. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had been so smug about testifying against me, thinking she was helping her brother secure a paycheck. Now she realized that her brother was not just broke, he was homeless. And worse, she knew Dion would come knocking on her door next. But the reaction I savored most was Raven is. I turned my head slightly to look at the gallery. Raven was sitting in the second row, looking like a statue carved out of ice. She was staring at Dion, not with love, not with concern, but with absolute horror. She was doing the math in her head. She was calculating the cost of the boat rental, the dinners, the shoes. She had thought she was upgrading. She thought she had snagged a wealthy real estate tycoon who was temporarily embarrassed by a bitter ex-wife. Now she realized the truth. She was dating a man who was living on credit, driving a leased car, and about to be kicked out of a house owned by the woman he dumped. Dion turned to look at her, searching for an ally. Raven, baby, do not listen to her. It is just a legal maneuver. I will fix it. Raven stood up. The sound of her expensive heels scraping against the floor was loud in the stunned room. She looked at Dion, her eyes traveling from his scuffed shoes to his sweating face. She looked at the judge, then she looked at me. She saw the power suit. She saw the calm confidence. She saw the woman who held the deed. Then she looked back at Dion with a sneer that curled her perfectly lined lips. You told me you owned the house free and clear, Raven said. Her voice was not loud, but it was vicious. You told me she was the one who was broke. Dion reached out a hand toward the railing. Baby, wait. Do not, Raven snapped, pulling her purse onto her shoulder. You are a fraud, Dion, and I am not going to be homeless with you. She turned and walked out of the courtroom. She did not look back. She pushed through the double doors, the swing of them sending a draft of air that hit Dion like a physical blow. He watched her go, his hand still outstretched, his face crumbling. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. The sound brought Dion back to the humiliation of the present moment. The judge looked down at Dion with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Mr. Williams, the judge said, given the evidence presented regarding your housing situation and the significant debt you owe to the defendant's company, I am dismissing your motion for temporary spousal support with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a forensic accounting of all marital assets to determine how much of the joint funds were misappropriated to pay for this mortgage that you have now defaulted on. Dion sank into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. The gray suit seemed to swallow him whole. Mr. Finch closed his briefcase. He did not look at his client. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he was already planning his exit strategy. I sat down next to Rebecca. She squeezed my hand under the table. We did it, she whispered. I looked across the aisle at Sarah. She was staring at me, her face pale. She knew what was coming next. She knew that the financial rot in this family did not stop with Dion. She knew I had the laptop. She knew I had the records. I offered Sarah a small, cold smile. It was a promise. You are next. Dion put his head in his hands. He had walked into this courtroom expecting a payday. He was leaving with an eviction notice. He had tried to use the law to bleed me dry, but he forgot that I was the one who wrote the checks. He forgot that loyalty has a price, but betrayal costs everything. The house of cards had fallen, and I was the one holding the wind machine. The courtroom was silent, but it was the silence of a bomb crater after the explosion. Dion sat slumped in his chair, staring at the foreclosure notice, as if it were written in a foreign language. He was trying to process the fact that the woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a financial burden, now owned the floorboards beneath his feet. But I was not done. I looked across the aisle at Sarah. She was clutching her purse tightly, her knuckles white. She was trying to make herself small, trying to fade into the background now that her brother had been destroyed. She thought that because she was just a witness, she was safe. She thought her role in this tragedy was over. She was wrong. I leaned over to Rebecca and whispered 2 words. The ledger. Rebecca nodded. She stood up again, commanding the attention of the room. Judge Holloway looked at her with a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. He had realized by now that every time my lawyer stood up, a new layer of this family's deception was peeled back. Your Honor, Rebecca said, her voice smooth and dangerous. While we are discussing the financial credibility of the plaintiff and his family, there is one more matter that speaks to the character of the witnesses who have testified against my client today. Mr. Finch tried to object, his voice weak. Your Honor, this is a support hearing. We have established the mortgage issue. Anything else is irrelevant. It is highly relevant, Rebecca countered, holding up a thick stack of bank statements. Because Mrs. Sarah Williams, the plaintiff's sister-in-law, just testified under oath that the family is destitute because they spent all their resources caring for their mother. She claimed my client Jasmine Williams abandoned the family financially. Sarah froze. Her eyes darted to the exit, calculating the distance. Rebecca walked to the witness stand, placing the documents on the ledge. We subpoenaed the bank records for the joint family account labeled Lucille Medical Fund. This was a fund established 6 months ago, primarily funded by donations from church members and significant contributions from Mr. Marcus Williams, the plaintiff's brother. I looked at the back of the courtroom. Marcus was sitting there. He was a quiet man, hardworking, who owned a landscaping business. He had been looking at his wife Sarah with pride just an hour ago. Now he was leaning forward, his brow furrowed. According to these records, Rebecca continued flipping a page. There is a balance of exactly $42 left in this account. However, there are no payments to hospitals. There are no payments to pharmacies. In fact, 90% of the withdrawals were made to a single entity. She paused for effect. The room held its breath. Ironclad Fitness and Wellness Center, Rebecca read. Specifically, a recurring payment of $2,000 a month for a premium package labeled private coaching, plus several large lump sum transfers for retreat fees. Dion looked up confused. Mom doesn't go to the gym. She's in a wheelchair. Exactly, Rebecca said. She turned to Sarah. Mrs. Williams, you are the sole signatory on this account. Can you explain to the court why the money meant for your mother-in-law's kidney rejection medication was transferred to the personal account of a Mr. Jackson Miller, a 24-year-old personal trainer? The air left the room. It was sucked out by the collective gasp of everyone present. Sarah stood up, her face turning a bright, blotchy red. It was an investment. She shrieked, her voice cracking. Jackson is... He is a holistic healer. He was helping me with my stress so I could care for Mom better. It is part of the caregiver support system. In the gallery, Marcus stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He was a big man, and he was shaking. Jackson. Marcus said, his voice low and terrifying. That kid who works at the front desk, the one you said gave you a discount on smoothies? Sarah spun around, her eyes wide with panic. Marcus, honey, sit down. It is not what it looks like. She is twisting it. Jasmine is twisting everything. Rebecca pulled out another piece of paper. We also have receipts for a weekend trip to Cabo San Lucas, charged to this account 2 weeks ago. The flight manifest lists 2 passengers, Sarah Williams and Jackson Miller. That was the match in the powder keg. You stole my money, Marcus roared. The sound was primal. It was the sound of a man who realized he had been working 60-hour weeks to fund his wife's affair while his mother was dying. You stole Mom's money to pay a gigolo. Marcus charged past the wooden railing. The bailiff shouted for order, but it was too late. Marcus did not go for me. He did not go for Dion. He lunged at his own wife. Sarah screamed, scrambling backward, tripping over her own feet and falling onto the courtroom floor. Marcus grabbed her purse, the expensive designer bag she had bought with stolen funds, and dumped it out. Lipsticks, credit cards, and a hotel room key from the Ritz-Carlton spilled across the floor. You are sick. Marcus yelled, his face purple. I sold my truck for that fund. I sold my truck to save Mom. And you went to Cabo. Dion jumped up, trying to stop his brother. Marcus, stop. You are in court. Get off me. Marcus shoved Dion so hard he flew back into the defendant's table, knocking over a pitcher of water. You knew. You must have known. You are all liars. The courtroom descended into absolute chaos. 2 bailiffs tackled Marcus, pinning him to the ground as he continued to scream obscenities at Sarah. Sarah was sobbing on the floor, not out of remorse but out of fear, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the truth. Dion was soaking wet, sitting in a puddle of water, looking from his brother to his sister-in-law, watching his entire family structure disintegrate in real time. Judge Holloway was banging his gavel so hard, I thought the handle would snap. Order, order in this court. Remove him. Remove him immediately. I sat perfectly still amidst the mayhem. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I watched the prestigious Williams family, the people who had looked down on me for 5 years, turn into a violent, screaming mess. They were eating each other alive. Sarah's facade of the perfect suburban mom was shattered. Marcus's dignity was gone. Dion was broken. The bailiffs finally managed to drag Marcus out of the doors, his screams echoing down the hallway. Sarah was helped up by a court officer, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, her dress torn at the shoulder. She looked at me with pure venom, but there was fear there too. She knew her life was over. Marcus would divorce her. She would be prosecuted for embezzlement. She was finished. The judge took a long moment to compose himself. He adjusted his robe, his face flushed with anger. He looked down at the wreckage of the plaintiff's table. In 20 years on the bench, Judge Holloway said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage, I have never witnessed such a disgraceful display of deceit, greed, and moral bankruptcy. He turned his gaze to Dion. Mr. Williams, you came into my courtroom claiming poverty. You claim to be the victim of a vindictive wife. Instead, what has been revealed today is a conspiracy of fraud, theft, and exploitation that frankly turns my stomach. You are living in a home you do not pay for. Your family is stealing from a sick woman to fund illicit affairs, and you have the audacity to ask this court for financial support. Dion tried to stand up to say something, anything. Your Honor. Please. I didn't know about Sarah. Silence. The judge roared. I do not want to hear another word from you or anyone in your family unless it is a guilty plea. Judge Holloway grabbed his pen and signed the order in front of him with aggressive strokes. The motion for spousal support is denied with prejudice. That means you can never ask for it again. Furthermore, I am referring the evidence regarding the misappropriation of the Lucille Medical Fund to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. Mrs. Sarah Williams, do not leave the state. He looked at me. For the first time, his expression was soft. Mrs. Williams, I apologize that you had to endure this. You are free to go, and regarding the foreclosure. He looked at Dion. I am granting an expedited eviction order. Mr. Williams, you have 24 hours to vacate the property at 42 Oak Street. If you are still there at noon tomorrow, the sheriff will remove you. Case dismissed. The gavel banged. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I stood up and gathered my files. I did not look at Dayon. I did not look at Sarah, who was shivering in the corner. I thanked Rebecca and walked toward the aisle. As I passed Dayon, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, desperate. Jasmine, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Please, I have nowhere to go. Raven left me. My family is destroyed. You can't do this. I am your husband. I looked down at his hand on my sleeve. I gently peeled his fingers off one by one, as if removing a piece of lint. You are not my husband, Dion, I said softly. You are just a bad investment. And I am liquidating my assets. I walked out of the courtroom doors into the bright hallway. The air was fresh. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks was gone. I could breathe. I checked my watch. It was lunchtime. I was hungry. For the first time in a long time, I had an appetite. I took out my phone and dialed the number for the nursing home administrator. It was time to handle the final piece of the puzzle. The cleanup was almost done. The sushi restaurant was quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the courtroom I had just left. I dipped a piece of tuna into soy sauce, watching the bubbles rise in my sparkling water. For the first time in months, my hand was steady. The foreclosure notice was served. The spousal support was denied. The fraud investigation was launched. I had essentially nuked the entire Williams family from orbit, and I was sitting here eating lunch with an appetite I had not felt since before the surgery. But the universe has a sense of humor, and it was not done with the punchlines yet. My phone buzzed on the table. It was not a number I recognized, but the area code was local. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and answered. This is Jasmine. Mrs. Williams, this is Dr. Evans from Piedmont Hospital. I froze. Dr. Evans was the chief transplant surgeon. He was the man who had cut me open. He was the man who had stitched Lucille back together. I am not Mrs. Williams anymore, doctor, I said, my voice cool. But I am listening. We have a situation, Jasmine, doctor, Evans said, and his voice was tight with urgency. Your mother-in-law was brought in via ambulance 40 minutes ago from the courthouse. She is in severe respiratory distress. Her blood pressure is critical, and her creatinine levels are spiking. It looks like an acute, stress-induced rejection episode combined with fluid overload. We need to intubate her immediately and start dialysis to save the kidney. I took a sip of water. That sounds like a conversation you should be having with her son. I tried, Dr. Evans said, sounding frustrated. The police officer who answered Mr. Williams' phone informed me that he is currently being processed at the county jail for contempt of court and disorderly conduct. He is indisposed. We tried calling her daughter-in-law Sarah, but her phone is disconnected. I almost laughed. Of course it was. Sarah was probably halfway to the border or hiding under her bed. Jasmine, the doctor, continued, his tone shifting to professional desperation. We checked the file. The durable power of attorney for healthcare is still active. You are listed as the primary medical proxy. You are the only person legally authorized to sign the consent forms for this procedure. Without your signature, we cannot intubate. If we do not intubate, she will go into cardiac arrest within the hour. I sat there in the quiet restaurant, holding the phone against my ear. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Lucille had spent the last month telling anyone who would listen that I was garbage. She had called me a parasite. She had tried to sue me. And now, as she lay dying because of the stress of her own lies, I was the only thing standing between her and the grave. I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. I paid my bill and drove to the hospital. I did not speed. I drove the speed limit, listening to a podcast about financial freedom. When I walked into the ICU, the nurses looked at me with a mixture of relief and fear. They knew the drama. Hospitals are small towns. Everyone knew that the woman who gave the kidney had been kicked out of the recovery room. Dr. Evans met me at the nursing station. He looked exhausted. Thank you for coming. She is in Bay 4. She is conscious but barely. We need the signature now. He handed me a clipboard. I did not sign it immediately. I want to see her, I said. Dr. Evans hesitated, then nodded. He led me to the glass sliding door. Lucille looked terrible. She was gray, her skin clammy and pale. An oxygen mask was strapped to her face, fogging up with her ragged, shallow breaths. Her eyes were wide and terrified, darting around the room until they landed on me. I walked to the side of the bed. I stood exactly where Dion should have been. I stood exactly where Sarah should have been. But they were gone. The golden sun was in a cell. The perfect daughter-in-law was in hiding. I leaned down close enough to smell the antiseptic and the fear coming off her. I pulled the oxygen mask aside for a second. Lucille gasped, her hand clawing weakly at my arm. Dion, she wheezed. Where is Dion? He is in jail. Lucille, I whispered. He is in jail because he attacked his brother. And Sarah? She stole your money to pay her boyfriend. They are all gone. Tears leaked out of the corners of her eyes, sliding down into her ears. She shook her head, trying to deny the reality I was forcing her to swallow. I am the only one left, I said, my voice hard and flat. The doctors say you are dying. They say your body is rejecting the gift I gave you because your heart cannot handle the truth of what your family did. They need a signature to save you. Please, she choked out. Please, Jasmine. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a judge delivering a sentence. You called me damaged goods, I whispered, leaning right into her ear. You told the court I was abusive. You told the world I was not good enough for your son. But look at you now. Your life, your breath, my kidney. It all belongs to me. The fate of this entire family rests in the hands of the mongrel you tried to throw away. I stood up and replaced the oxygen mask. I turned to Dr. Evans, who was watching from the doorway, looking uncomfortable. I grabbed the clipboard. I signed my name with a flourish. Jasmine Williams, medical proxy. Do it, I said, handing the board back. Save her. Dr. Evans let out a breath. Thank you. We will prep the OR. One more thing, doctor, I said, stopping him before he could rush away. Yes, I pulled a document from my purse. It was the insurance termination letter I had shown them at the party. As you know, Mrs. Williams is no longer covered under my corporate policy. And since her son is currently incarcerated and indigent, there are no private funds available for her post-operative care. Dr. Evans frowned. Jasmine, we can discuss billing later. The priority is stabilizing her. No, I said firmly. We will discuss it now. Because once she is stable, she cannot stay here. This is a private facility. The daily rate for this ICU bed is $5,000. I am not paying it, and Dion certainly cannot pay it. So what are you suggesting? Dr. Evans asked. I am not suggesting. I am ordering. As her medical proxy, I am directing you to initiate a transfer order immediately upon stabilization. She is to be moved to a state-funded long-term care facility. Dr. Evans looked shocked. Jasmine, the state facilities. They are not. They are underfunded. The closest one with a bed available is Shady Pines over in East Point. It is basically a warehouse for the destitute. I know, I said smoothly. I checked their rating. 1 star. But it is what the family can afford, which is 0. But she is a transplant patient, Dr. Evans argued. She needs a sterile environment. She needs specialized diet. Shady Pines has had 3 health code violations this year. Then maybe she should have been nicer to the woman who paid the bills, I said, cutting him off. I looked back at Lucille. She was listening. Her eyes were bulging. She knew what Shady Pines was. It was the place people went to die alone, surrounded by the smell of bleach and despair. It was the place she had threatened to send her own mother years ago. No, she muffled behind the mask, shaking her head violently. No. I looked at her one last time. It is done, I said to the doctor. Stabilize her. Then ship her out. If you keep her here 1 hour past stabilization, I will sue the hospital for billing fraud. Do I make myself clear? Dr. Evans looked at me, then looked at the dying woman on the bed. He nodded slowly. Crystal clear. I turned and walked out of the ICU. I did not look back. I heard the alarms starting to beep as they rushed to intubate her, but the sound did not haunt me. It sounded like justice. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the linoleum. I pressed the button for the lobby. Lucille was going to live. She was going to live a long time, but she was going to live in a room with peeling paint and fluorescent lights, eating lukewarm oatmeal, staring at the ceiling, and knowing that the kidney keeping her alive was beating with the vengeance of the woman she scorned. Death would have been too easy. Mercy would have been a weakness. This was the perfect balance. I gave her life just like she asked. I just didn't give her the lifestyle. The elevator doors opened and I walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled sweet. It smelled like freedom. I had one last stop to make. The nursing home admission office required a deposit even for state patients. I would pay it. It would be the last check I ever wrote for the Williams family. A small price to pay to ensure she had a front row seat to her own misery. The deadline Judge Holloway set was absolute. 12:00 noon. Not a minute later. I did not go to the house to watch the eviction. I did not need to see it to know exactly what it looked like. I had seen the schedule. I knew the sheriff deputies who handled these removals. They were not known for their patience. Dion spent his final morning in the house frantically packing boxes that he had nowhere to store. He called me 6 times between 9 and 10 in the morning. I blocked the number after the first ring. He called Sarah, but her phone was disconnected. He called Raven, but she had already changed her number. At noon precisely, the deputies knocked on the heavy oak door. They did not wait for an answer. They entered with the authority of the law and the paperwork I had provided. Mrs. Gable, my nosy neighbor, who had been my eyes and ears, told me later that Dion was dragged out of the front door crying. He was holding a garment bag of his suits and a box of shoes. That was all he managed to save. The rest of the furniture, the electronics, the life we had built was locked inside. Now the property of Jasmine Holdings to be auctioned off to recoup the debt. Dion sat on the curb for 3 hours next to his leased BMW. He looked like a king who had lost his kingdom and realized the crown was made of tinfoil. Eventually, he loaded his suits into the back seat of the car and drove away. He did not go to a hotel. His credit cards were maxed out. He did not go to family. They were broken. He drove to a Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of town. That is where he lives now. In the back seat of a luxury car, he can no longer afford to put gas in, sleeping curled up next to his Italian leather shoes, waiting for the repo man to come and take the last piece of his fake identity. Raven did not waste a single second grieving the relationship. The moment the judge revealed Dion was broke, she initiated her exit strategy. She deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed before she even left the courthouse parking lot. It was as if he never existed. 2 days later, a friend sent me a screenshot. Raven was tagged in a photo on a private jet, sitting on the lap of a 60-year-old club promoter in Miami. She had monkey branched to a new host, a new wallet. She was a parasite who had sensed the host was dying and moved on to fresh blood. I almost pitied the new guy. He had no idea how expensive her affection truly was. Sarah fared far worse. The forensic accounting of the Lucille Medical Fund was swift and brutal. The district attorney took the case personally. Embezzling money meant for a sick elderly woman is the kind of crime juries hate. Marcus filed for divorce the same day the charges were pressed. He did not just kick her out. He provided the police with every bank statement, every receipt, every lie she had told him. Sarah is currently out on bail, living in her parents' guest room awaiting trial. The suburban mom who judged my furniture and mocked my pain is now facing 5 to 10 years in a state penitentiary. She lost her marriage, her reputation, and soon she will lose her freedom. And then there is Lucille. The transfer to the state-funded nursing facility happened exactly as I ordered. The ambulance ride was not a luxury transport. It was a standard county vehicle. When they wheeled her into Shady Pines, the reality of her new life hit her like a physical blow. There were no private rooms, there were no garden views. There was a roommate, a woman with advanced dementia, who screamed at invisible birds all night long. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige, peeling in the corners. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and boiled cabbage. I visited her one last time not to gloat, but to sign the final admission paperwork, ensuring I would never be billed for her care. She was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, staring out at the parking lot. She looked small, frail. When she saw me, she did not scream. She did not insult me. She just looked at my side, at the place where her life support had come from. Her hand trembled as she touched her own abdomen, tracing the line of the scar hidden beneath her hospital gown. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you save me if you were going to put me here?" "Because I keep my promises, Lucille," I said, standing in the doorway. "I promised to give you a second chance at life. I never promised to fund it. You have a roof over your head. You have 3 meals a day. You have my kidney filtering your blood. You have everything you need to survive. You just do not have the audience to perform for anymore." I walked away, leaving her there. She spends her days now sitting in the common room watching daytime television. She tells the nurses stories about her wealthy son and her grand house, but nobody believes her. They just nod and give her the generic medication that keeps her alive. Every time she takes a breath, every time her heart beats, she is reminded of me. I am part of her forever. I am the ghost in her machine, the constant reminder that she betrayed the only person who was willing to bleed for her. 3 months have passed since that day. I stood in the dealership lot, the sun glinting off the hood of my new car. It was not a practical sedan. It was a sleek white convertible with a red leather interior. I bought it with the profits from liquidating the Oak Street house. I signed the check with a steady hand, the name Jasmine Williams looking strong and bold on the paper. I drove down the highway with the top down, the wind whipping through my hair. The pain in my side was gone. The scar had faded to a thin silver line. It no longer hurt when I laughed. It no longer pulled when I stretched. It was just a mark now, a battle scar from a war I had won. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. It was an email from the CEO of my insurance company. Subject: promotion offer. Regional Director of Risk Management. I smiled. The investigation into the anonymous email had not only cleared my name, but it had also highlighted my impeccable record and my ability to handle high-pressure crises. They were offering me a position that came with a corner office, a significant raise, and a team of my own. I was no longer just a claims adjuster. I was the boss. I pulled the car over at a scenic overlook. Below me, the city of Atlanta sprawled out, vibrant and alive. I stepped out and walked to the railing. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with fresh air. For 5 years, I had made myself small to fit into their world. I had apologized for my success. I had hidden my intelligence. I had literally cut pieces of myself away to try and make them love me, and in return, they tried to bury me. But they forgot that you cannot bury a seed. You only help it grow. They took my kindness for weakness. They took my silence for submission. They took my kidney and thought they had taken my power. But they were wrong. I looked down at the city, thinking of Dion sleeping in his car, Sarah awaiting trial, and Lucille staring at a peeling wall. I did not feel hate anymore. Hate takes energy. I felt nothing but a cool, calm indifference. They were the architects of their own destruction. I just handed them the bricks. Hate is heavy, but indifference is weightless. I got back into my car and started the engine. The engine purred, a sound of power and potential. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the broken wife crying in a hospital bed. She was whole. She was formidable. She was free. I put the car in drive and merged back onto the highway, driving toward a horizon that belonged completely to me. They took a kidney, but I took back my life. And honestly, it was a fair trade. Sometimes you have to lose something to find out what you are truly made of. Sometimes cutting out a part of your body is the only way to remove the cancer that is killing you. For me, the cancer was not a disease. It was a husband. It was a family who saw me as an appliance rather than a human being. If you are watching this and you feel like you are setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, stop. Look at the ashes around you. Ask yourself if they would bleed for you the way you bleed for them. If the answer is no, then it is time to perform your own surgery. It is time to cut the ties. It will hurt. It will leave a scar. But I promise you the healing on the other side is worth every second of the pain. Do not let them take your dignity. Do not let them take your peace. And never ever let them think they won just because they left you with a scar. Scars are not signs of damage. They are proof that you survived whatever tried to kill you. My name is Jasmine. I am one kidney lighter, but my soul has never been heavier with gold. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to stand alone to find your strength, tell me in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. And remember, the best revenge is not just surviving. It is thriving so loudly that they cannot ignore your success.